This Voice of San Diego podcast is brought to you by our new sponsor, Manolatos Nelson Murphy Advertising and Public Relations. It's San Diego's newest communications firm. NMM is run by Tony Manolatos, Bob Nelson, and Kelly Murphy Lampkin, who bring decades of advertising and public relations experience to the practice. M&M creates connections and drives results, offering strategic planning, media relations, online, print, and broadcast advertising, coalition building, and crisis communications. Our reporters at Voice San Diego have definitely heard a lot from Tony and Bob over the years. Tony, Bob, and Kelly are supporters of Voice San Diego, and you can learn more about their new firm at mnmadpr.com. That's mnmadpr.com. Welcome to the Voice of San Diego podcast, where we make sense of local politics, schools, housing, public safety, the civic issues that impact the life of a San Diego resident. We break it down so you can understand it and make educated decisions.
Everything that goes into our investigative reporting, the journalists, public records requests, the data crunching, and this very show depends on the support of people like you because we're a nonprofit news organization. Enjoy the show. Welcome to our friends listening on News Radio Kogo. This is Andrew Keatts, and this is a special podcast episode because I am once again joined by my friend Sara Libby.
Hey, what's up?
How
very
are you?
Special.
Yes, it's a very special episode. This is every episode with Sara Libby, particularly because we get to make fun of Scott Lewis.
It's really the only reason why I agree to do this.
Yeah, you're certainly the best option as a guest co-host because you're good at that, among other things. So for instance, Scott's in Hamburg, Germany right now.
Yeah, he's just big time.
He's at
Mr. Worldwide is what we call him.
He's at like a journalism conference, and I'm nervous. I'm scared.
Why? Tell me why.
Well, I'm already getting like a bunch of texts from him about like the scale of buildings there, and that he had a conversation with a German journalist about their housing policy, and he was talking to me about
like fanboying over Europe.
Yeah, and he's like really into how walkable it is, and I just know that it's going to translate into something he wants to do to Voice of San Diego when he gets back. I don't know what it is, but it's going to involve a change in my job because it's like, you know, they say like some stories are based on what happens to an editor on the way to work. Mm-hmm. Like my beat is going to change because Scott went to Germany, and I don't know how, but it's going to happen.
Well, I mean, maybe it will involve like fried meats or
or like
chocolate, and that would be great.
It great.
Reminds me of, several days a week, our friend Randy Dotinga writes the morning report.
Yeah.
And I swear to you, like 2 to 3 days a week, I'm editing out random asides about how much he loves the city of Denver and how it has like a magical transportation system, and it's like very convenient and awesome.
Yeah.
And I imagine Scott's return being like that.
Being like that. Like we're perpetually going to learn about something that is in Hamburg. I'll get my edits back and it'll be like some aside, like you could mention here that Hamburg does housing policy like this. In any case.
Miss you, Scott.
Yeah, I can't wait till you're back. So it's a special show for another reason. We have 2 guests on the second part of the show. If you're listening on Kogo, then check us out on podcast. We've got Mike McConnell. He's a homeless advocate who has commissioned his own poll on the mayor's TOT increase proposal and his own alternative proposal that would spend all of the money from hotel occupancy taxes on homelessness. And also Andrea Guerrero, community organizer who was behind the push for Measure K and L, and that is obviously newly important now because Measure L is now suddenly already relevant. It's the reason we shouldn't have a special election.
750 ballot measures on the November 2016 ballot, that would be the thing that everyone's fighting about.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to that podcast you did, which, by the way, I recently learned is the most listened to podcast in Voice of San Diego history.
You know, everyone likes to think of Scott and Andy as the podcast guys, but when you really look at the numbers
speak for themselves. That was the most listened to podcast in Voice of San Diego history. The rundown of all the ballot measures. I want to see how much time you guys spent on Measure L.
I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
Couldn't tell you the answer to that.
Well,
you hosted a big raucous debate on Measure K, and we thought
that
was that was the election democracy issue.
I can't bring myself to listen to that hour and a half debate where I don't think Measure L specifically came up once. All right, but in any case, let's dive into it. There's a bunch of things happened this week regarding the two big issues that are potentially going to a vote in November. One is the mayor's proposal to raise hotel taxes by 1% to 3%, to spend all that money to build a new convention, to expand the convention center, and then spin off some new revenue for homelessness and infrastructure repairs. And another measure that would redevelop the area of Qualcomm Stadium and the Chargers' old practice facility into something called Soccer City, which would be a mixed-use development that would be home to a stadium that could potentially house an MLS expansion team.
So one thing that I think is really interesting about how this has played out in the news over the last week is that like almost no part of the debate whatsoever has been about the substance of these two measures.
I know. Yeah.
It's sprouted off into two separate things.
Yeah.
One, the timing of the special election, whether it should be a special election or a general election, and that's what the whole Measure L debate is about.
Yeah.
And two, it turns out the mayor has a lot of power that literally no one knew about.
Yeah, so let's start with that one because that is very interesting. Okay, so the city council had to approve the budget this week, just the whole budget, not anything specific. And one line item in that was money to fund a special election. It costs money to hold a special election, so you got to put $5 million in for the budget. The city council took it out. Part of their justification was that we didn't have $5 million to burn on this. And the other was Measure L said we shouldn't have this election now. And then at the end of the city council meeting, Councilman Mark Kersey made a cryptic reference to the fact that the mayor could do a specific veto of that decision not to fund the special election and put it back in. And there was a request for clarification from the city attorney, and Deputy City Attorney Brant Will went up and whispered into City Attorney Mara Elliott's ear, and in Mara Elliott's own words said that it is the opinion of the city attorney's office that the mayor can do whatever he wants.
Yeah. Which, side note, I want to go back to a real heroic move by Mark Kersey to say, I'm going to vote for this thing with the understanding that my vote doesn't matter.
yeah, exactly. It was like signaling to the room, like, just so we're clear, my vote is for something else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the mayor can do whatever he wants as it pertains to the budget, basically.
Can you imagine, like, somewhere in Los Angeles, Bob Filner's head is exploding?
It's like, what?
I knew it!
That's what I tried to tell him. I can do whatever I want. Yeah, and similarly, so, like, the mayor's chief of staff, Stephen Pitts, right as soon as the city council meeting ended, quoted that line and said, yep.
Yeah, he tweeted it?
Yeah, he tweeted that. And
that seems like not a tweet that you really want out there.
Yeah, it seems like
insistence that you are unilaterally powerful.
Right. Like that seems like actually a political liability. What you want is to just do whatever you want, but not acknowledge that that's the case or like revel in it. But in any case, so what we learned this week about our system of government is that when the mayor puts out his budget proposal, and then the city council goes through a months-long process through committees of reshaping it in their own image, and then passes something that the mayor can veto any of those changes and add back anything that was in his original proposed budget, and the city council then needs a supermajority vote to override his decision to do that, essentially meaning that the mayor has complete autonomy over the budget, checked only by a supermajority vote.
Yeah, if you just fast forward, it means the budget has to be approved by a supermajority of the council.
Right.
Which no one knew.
Which also, okay, so no one knew, except apparently people in the mayor's office who had clearly had this, knew this going into the vote, and also seemed to have deployed it for the very first time in a instance where there's no clear way to know that they're going to win. Like they still might not get what they want out of this.
So let's game it out.
Yeah.
So either they could not get a supermajority, which it sort of seems, given the indications of people like Kersey, that
they
might happen. Yeah, it seems like they'll get it.
Who knows what happens with votes, but it seems like they'll get it.
Right. And what are the other ways that this could like all blow up?
Well, so this is all to fund a special election,
right?
Which is something separate from scheduling a special election.
So there's that.
And so he could.
And then there's actually like winning the special election.
And then there's actually winning the special election, which no one's even talking about right now, but seems like a lower than 50%
somewhere down
chance.
the line we'll deal with that.
Yeah. But so he could successfully pull off this gambit, get if he just maintains the 4 Republican council members to vote with him, he'll be able to schedule this, or he'll be able to fund this special election, but then it'll be a separate decision to actually schedule this special election, which 5 city council members have said that they're not going to do.
And so he doesn't have any authority over that decision. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, I should not.
I guess no one knows anything.
Yeah, I should not say any
of
that anywhere near as authoritatively as I just did. That is my understanding, and so this could all be for naught. You just go right. You extend the conclusion a couple weeks, but it's still not clear how they get to a special election. To say nothing about winning. Now, on the winning front, we did get one big piece of news this week, potentially, maybe not. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe nothing matters. Is the appraisal came out for the value of all of the land eyed for this soccer city development, and I think it's safe to say it was larger than anyone anticipated. Not just larger than anyone anticipated, but correct me if I'm wrong, like by scales of magnitude. Yes, yeah, I would say so. So like there's like this clip of Steve Peace from last year when he was pushing the Measure D, a separate proposal that included redeveloping Qualcomm Stadium for SDSU West. There's a clip of him on talk radio last year circulating where he said, well, we think that the value of the property could be anywhere from negative 25 million to 50 million, I think was the range that he provided. And so it turned out to not be negative 25 million. Definitely not that. So I don't even know if it's fair to say exponentially more than that, because it's just a lot more. Yeah. So $110 million. That's a lot of dollars. And so also interestingly, since the mayor's office agreed to the parameters of a lease agreement with Soccer City a few weeks ago, or with FS Investors, the team behind Soccer City a few weeks ago, we already know what the budgetary impacts of that amount of money are, because what they agreed to was up until the point that they build everything out and can start buying certain pieces of it, right, they would pay 10% of that every year. 10% of whatever number they come back with. So $11 million a year. That's real money for a city that's dealing with a serious budget deficit. Definitely. So now I mentioned this as something that might actually change the outcome of a vote. In the immediate term, it's actually potentially more important about getting a vote to happen. Yeah. Because we mentioned that 5 city council members have indicated that they are not in favor of scheduling a special election. Right. So something big would need to change to get them to You need something flip. To make them to flip. It's not very easy to just be like, no, change because change. Right. Right. But $11 million a year could do it. Yeah. And or if nothing else, it disarms the argument that had been floating around out there that they were going to get the land for a song. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there is an interesting thing going on here where like suddenly everybody is an expert on real estate valuations, and I only know that this seems to be larger than people expected by talking to people about their expectations. Mm-hmm. I have no expertise in evaluating 200 acres of urban property about what its actual market value is. I'm not good at that because that's not my job. That's not something I'm not either. And I feel like if I had to ballpark it, I actually would guess like, yeah, it's worth a lot of money. It's a huge property in the heart of San Diego. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and so The other thing that was notable about the evaluation is they included in it the assumption that it would be entitled at its highest and best use, to use a planning jargon term, which is to
if
say,
I was
like,
editing you right now, I would say it in real words.
Say it in real words.
Human words.
Right. Well, here I go. That you basically assume like whatever the most efficient and effective market use of that property, that you evaluated it that much, because land's only worth as much as you can do something with it.
Right.
An acre of property that is restricted from any building forever is worth almost nothing. One with a single family home on it is worth more, and one with
lots of
10
homes
apartments on
Yeah.
it is worth even more than that, right? So they evaluated it at its highest and best use. They also included in that the cost of demolishing a stadium that is functionally obsolete, apparently, and it still came in that high. So that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
All of which to say, though, I don't know that any of that still matters. I still don't know if that's enough to move anyone. There was also, we should mention that there's this other thing floating around. Earlier on Monday, I reported there's this group of people who've been pushing for a ballot measure on affordable housing and homelessness and associated needs for the 2018 ballot. They call themselves Build Better San Diego. It's labor groups and environmentalists and just a coalition of progressive folks. And the Labor Council, the Labor Council, as part of those discussions, sent to Mayor Faulconer last month a letter explaining their opposition to his hotel tax increase, and put 3 bullet points for what they would need to support it one in the future. And they said
what they would take to flip.
What they would take to flip, and it was a project labor agreement written into the initiative, like a legally binding project labor agreement, not just a handshake deal.
Which you can't legally do.
Which
right?
the city attorney says he can't do. So that's something to be figured out. I don't know how that circle gets squared. And a 40-year agreement for managing the convention center that would also be union friendly.
Okay.
And a commitment to put a separate ballot measure on as well, similar to one in LA, that basically said if a developer gets a waiver of the community plan that that the project is built in, or zoning, that there would suddenly be some requirements on hiring union construction and building affordable housing. So those 3 things are apparently the starting point of negotiations for labor to come on board. And so the appraisal is nice, but it actually seems like all of those 3 things, or one of those 3 things, is far more important to the most powerful group on the left, and it's the left that's the opposition to this right now. And that all that's to say, whether they would ever be willing to turn back on Measure L, which you can listen to the show later on. We've got proponents for Measure L who are here to talk to us about that debate. Have we said everything that happened this week? It was a lot.
I normally feel like I would talk you out of let's not talk about a stadium for the podcast that I'm going to come on. But there's really no avoiding it this week.
Yeah. It's because you're like a reasonable person who recognizes that that's not the most the most pressing issue facing the city. But you said
it, not me.
But you could be fooled by living here for the last 3 years, because it sure seems to be the most pressing issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in any case, I think we've gone over it all.
It's a lot.
All right. Our hero of the week. Some back padding.
You got it.
I got it now. Some back padding here. This goes to Voice of San Diego's own Maya Srikrishnan. It's like super sly, didn't disclose this to anybody yet.
Real low key about it. We all read about it in the culture report.
I was like, wait. So Maya Srikrishnan is also a violinist.
Yeah.
And will be playing in Balboa Park this weekend on Sunday for mainly Mozart's San Diego Makes Music Community Collaboration Concert. So there's a plug here. Go.
She's a member of the community.
She's a member of the community.
She's going to play the violin.
So go find a way to get tickets for the thing I just said, and then go there and watch Maya Krishnan play the violin, which apparently is something she does. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, and then she's going to come in on Monday and do like investigative reporting.
Be a journalist again. Yeah. Our GOAT of the week.
You lose! Good
So this
day,
goes
sir.
to the concert goers and also security team.
Just like everybody involved.
Everyone who had any part in this show. It was at the North Park Observatory Wednesday night, and a massive brawl broke out, but it started with somebody just absolutely body slamming the main performer as he was on stage.
He was on stage rapping into a mic, and just like the body comes flying.
So we'll post a link to the video, but it is a bananas video.
Yes, and then the security guards just start wailing on this guy, and like, don't get me wrong, he needed to be restrained. He was clearly a violent individual, but it's just people throwing haymakers, and somebody got stabbed at that.
Yeah, so like let's throw that guy into the GOAT as well.
So everybody associated with that, except for like the people who just wanted a nice night at a concert and ended up part of a brawl. You're not being goated.
You're fine.
Yeah, sorry, you're fine. In fact, you're heroes. Okay, if you are listening on Kogo, please go ahead, pull out your phone, figure out how to get yourself to a podcast. Look for Voice of San Diego Radio. Stick around because we've got 2 interviews this week. They're both very good. First is Mike McConnell. He's a homeless advocate. He has conducted a poll on what the community, what voters think about a proposal to raise hotel tax increases, and instead of spending it on a convention center, to spend all of it on building affordable housing and housing homeless people. So we talked about that, and we talked about how he got into his life of advocacy. We also did another interview with Andrea Guerrero from Alliance San Diego on the philosophical underpinnings of Measure L and how it went from an obscure measure on a very long ballot just a few months ago to this thing that has upended San Diego politics. And also what her organization does. It's an organizing group that has been known to pack council chambers from time to time, and also, collected enough signatures to put Measure K and Measure L on the ballot. So you'll get to know her. Sara and I did these interviews together, and you don't have to listen to Scott Lewis, which is a benefit in its own right. So that's it from News Radio 600 Kogo.
This is Erin. I'm the Director of Development for Voice of San Diego. I'm here today with one of our sponsors, Tony Manilatis from Manilatis Nelson Murphy Advertising and Public Relations. Why do people hire your firm? Why do businesses and government agencies and nonprofits come to you guys specifically?
Our experience and our relationships are what we're known for. We like to say we create connections and drive results. Well, in order to do those things, we need to be very experienced, and we need to be well connected. And we bring decades of experience to the job, and we have strong relationships with government officials, elected leaders, nonprofits, business leaders, you name it.
If you'd like to learn more about the services Tony and his partners offer, please visit their website, www.mnmadpr.com.
We are here in the great Voice of San Diego podcast studio in downtown San Diego with our guest this week, Mike McConnell. Mike, how you doing, man?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
All right. So by way of introduction, because you have a pretty interesting story. So you are a local businessman and have found your way into becoming a almost seemingly at least full-time homelessness advocate activist. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's a good description.
Okay. And so you started a Facebook page a few years ago called San Diego Homelessness News.
Homelessness News San Diego.
Homelessness News San Diego. And that just snowballed from there and has become more, it's basically, I see you every morning at Influx Coffee in Golden Hill, and you're usually seemingly preparing for a day of homeless advocacy.
I'm going to have to change my coffee shop now.
Yeah, right. Yes. So tell us a little bit about yourself. The reason you're here, the ostensible reason you're here, is that you have made a lot of news this week because you funded a poll on not just the mayor's TOT measure that includes some revenue for homelessness, but also a potential alternative measure that would be specifically geared towards turning all of the new revenue for homelessness. But before we get to that, tell us a little bit about your path here. How did you become almost consumed by homeless advocacy?
Well, the advocacy is just one part of what I do. But to go back to the bigger question, I've been a small business owner since I was 15 years old. So after about 30 years of working and growing my business, I wanted to get more involved in a community issue. And I chose homelessness for a variety of reasons. And it did. It just grew on me. The more I learned about not just the people experiencing homelessness, the issue, and also the people working on the issue, and the amount of money that we were spending in what I quickly found out was a very inefficient and ineffective way. It just grew on me for a whole variety of reasons. And the solutions grew on me too, because the solutions to homelessness benefit the entire community. They have a beautiful ripple effect. When you have less people becoming homeless, being homeless on your streets, going through your system, whatever it is, it benefits your entire community because they're actually in housing, they're participating in the economy, they're not a draw on tourism or any other parts of our economy or lifestyle, and they're actually participating in all of those things. So I love that ripple effect that happens when you reduce homelessness.
And so, I mean, small business owner isn't somebody who walks in with a store of policy expertise on the matter. How did you, who did you talk to? What did you do to kind of bone up on the relatively vast literature out there on how to best deal with homelessness?
Well, I basically used my same business principles, and I went and learned from the smartest people in the country. And I spent money and time traveling around, learning also from people here locally, but I met up with people from the Gates and Hilton Foundations, Melville Charitable Trust that are very involved in a national organization called Funders Together to End Homelessness, which we have a local affiliate that I'm a part of, and that's where I invest the bulk of my money through. But I really went to the high-performing communities, and I went and met with the people who were providing the best solutions in their communities and looking at the results they were getting. I also went to all the national conferences. So it was really building relationships with all the people around the country and in San Diego who were working on this issue in the best possible way. And that would be the same way I would, if I wanted to open another business, that would be the same thing I would do.
Who do you go to here? Who's somebody in San Diego or some group of people or an organization that gets it? Who do you think are the people here who really understand homelessness?
Wow, that's a great question.
Yeah.
So there's parts of many different agencies that are doing good work, and there's parts of many different agencies that are really stuck in the inefficient and ineffective methods of our issue and our work. There's consultants here. We have a Corporation for Supportive Housing office led by Simon Ruff that does some great work around helping agencies and developers build high-quality permanent supportive housing. We have another consulting firm called Sara Development Consultants, and they have two amazing homelessness experts who work there, Christopher Keatts and Jonathan Hunter, who are leading their homelessness work. So those are some of the people that I talk to, but I talk to many people, and I'm willing to work with anybody. I have no agenda other than getting more people out of homelessness and into housing. So it makes no difference who I work with. I take everybody's phone call, and I'm willing to try to help any group that wants to move real solutions forward.
So you mentioned traveling around and visiting cities that have made big dents in their homeless populations and talking to people who have come up with solutions. I think it's sort of easy to forget in San Diego that there are communities that have virtually eliminated certain homeless populations or made really big dents in their overall homeless populations. Are there things that strike you as really obvious things we could be doing that have worked in other places that we're not doing?
Yes, absolutely. And so no community has it 100% right, but there's a lot of communities across the country that are doing many parts of this right. And one of the communities I visited early on was Philadelphia, who had 24/7, 365 outreach on the streets. So complete outreach coverage. There was somebody you could call other than the police if you encountered somebody experiencing homelessness. And I actually would go out and ride along with those teams and see how they interacted with people who were experiencing homelessness. And I was able to see how they were able to mitigate a lot of the issues that we have here, especially on our downtown streets with a high unsheltered population. They were actually able to mitigate a lot of those issues. Doesn't mean they don't have folks living on their street. It just means they're tackling the issue in a much more proactive, solutions-focused way.
People also often cite Houston. Houston comes up a lot, Salt Lake City. Is there anything that those two places are doing specifically that we could learn from?
Yeah, so Salt Lake City was an early leader certainly on ending chronic homelessness. And so they really just took a big focus and they built a lot of units.
Housing.
Built a lot of housing for people
Imagine
experiencing chronic homelessness. And they were able to almost eliminate what we call chronic homelessness. But it's important to remember that is just one small percentage of the overarching homeless population. I was just in Salt Lake City for a data conference, Homeless Services Data Conference. And there's quite a few people living on the street. But I'll tell you what I didn't see. I did not see elderly, disabled people on their streets. I saw younger people that we're seeing a lot more across the country because of the opioid epidemic. We're seeing that here also, it seems. But they literally took those chronically homeless people and put them into housing and are keeping them there. From what I could visually see on their streets, it was very much a different population living on their streets than we have here in San Diego, where you see people in wheelchairs, in walkers. We see senior citizens laying on sidewalks, unattended, nobody's helping them. These folks have serious disabilities. Those are the folks they house. They said enough is enough. These folks are costing us a lot with criminal justice systems, emergency systems. We're putting them into housing no matter what, and they did. And
go ahead.
I would just say Houston and Orlando, Florida are or Central Florida, I should say, because they work as a region. I would say that the best thing that those two communities have done, and they've been some of the fastest turnarounds on overall homelessness in their communities, they focused on a system. That really is what they did. They focused on bringing people together, getting everybody rowing in the right direction.
Meaning providers?
Including providers, yes. And the providers were very important. They always are very important because you can't do anything without the people who are actually providing the services on the ground. And they got people rowing in the right direction. They built a true system. And that's why I think I'm most impressed with those two communities, Central Florida and Harris County, Texas, which is where Houston is in.
So like, for instance, in Orlando or Houston or Salt Lake City, did they go through the same fights over housing first and that sort of thing?
So I think housing first is one of the most understood things that we talk about. I think if we all sit down and look at the data, we can all agree that it's best to get people into permanent housing as quickly as possible and help people stay there with the supportive services they need. That's what the data shows over and over and over all across the country. Now, how do you actually get somebody into that unit with the supportive services, and what steps do you take? That's where there's a little bit more disagreement. But I think if we all came together around that overarching theme of trying to get people into housing as quickly as possible, maybe we don't say housing first just because it's become such a hot button issue. I think we could all agree. But yes, most communities have had these battles, but quite honestly, the debate is over nationally.
Yeah.
It's not over locally because we tend to be a little bit behind the times here, but the debate's over.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, folks, but the data shows clearly what's the best way to solve homelessness. But that does not mean there are different paths into the housing and different needs that people have. So we need to recognize that, and we also need to recognize the fact that client choice comes into this, and clients sometimes choose different paths than what a provider thinks is the best. So there's a lot to that. We could literally have a whole show on that. But the debate's over. I think we can really come together and agree that we need to get people into permanent housing, and the rest, we can figure that out. It's not brain surgery. We just need to have a real will to do it.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about this poll that you commissioned. And so first of all, I have this right. You funded this poll? You paid?
I did. So I've been asked this. So
Yeah.
nobody else participated in the funding of this poll. It's 100% funded by myself as an individual, not representing anybody, which I don't represent anybody to start with. I'm a member of different things and I sit on committees, but I am totally independent. I've never received a dime for my work. I don't sit on anybody's board, and I do that specifically so that I can stay 100% independent. And I just did this as a community member who wants to move forward the issue of homelessness in the best possible way.
So what's the simple reason you decided a poll needs to be done, and specifically this poll? Why did we need this?
Well, I have one agenda, and that is to get more people out of homelessness and into permanent housing, get people off the streets, out of our system, out of shelters, into permanent housing, and leave a better system behind that people can quickly get out of homelessness when they do become homeless. So anything that has to do with homelessness, I'm going to be on it. And anything that I think is not necessarily the best path forward, I'm going to be really analyzing it. So when the mayor's TOT initiative came up and there was a small amount of money for homelessness, which I knew would not make a huge difference in the issue, I wanted to find out, is this the best we can do?
Mm-hmm. And so the line that they've been using publicly and from what I understand behind closed doors as well is the homelessness aspect of this measure is a drag on it. We are including it in, but the popular item is the convention center, and we're using that popular item to get funding for the unpopular item. So I assume, based on the way you smiled when I explained that you take issue with that.
Well, I don't take issue with it. The voters take issue with it, and it's clear. And I'm gonna read you a question out of the poll whenever you're ready. That
I was polled on this, right?
I do realize that.
Yeah,
it was pretty funny when I
really
saw that tweet come up.
Andy.
And let me clear up something here, Andy,
Yeah.
because I listened to your podcast last week, I think it was, and there's not a conspiracy theory. I did not put you on that poll, okay? It was just by chance.
Yeah.
We didn't exclude reporters.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
And certainly happy that you shared the information. There's no problem with that.
All right.
So the voters have said that the convention center is not the priority.
Yeah.
The voters have said that homelessness is a much, much higher priority. And maybe we'll start out. So I'll share something that's not in the
memo.
In the memo.
Yeah.
Because the poll, it's a 20-minute poll, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I spared nothing on this poll. I wanted it to represent my independent values on this. So we even had it, I believe we even had it translated into Spanish. I'm pretty sure, because it cost me quite a bit extra money to do that. But we really wanted it to be representative and unbiased and really look at this issue. So I had the best information possible that I'd be able to share with whoever wanted it, including the mayor, to help inform how he moves forward on this. But I think this sums it up. So a question early on in the poll asked, regardless of how you would vote about Measure A, so after we read the mayor's Measure A to the voters, potential voters, we asked, regardless of how you would vote about Measure A, of the three main uses of funds described in the measure, which one do you think is the highest priority? Expanding the convention center, reducing homelessness, repairing streets and roads.
Mm-hmm.
Expanding the convention center got 9%. Out of the full sampling for a November 2018 potential sampling, 9%, 61% thought reducing homelessness was the highest priority. Only 21% thought repairing streets and roads were the highest priority out of that measure, that actually surprised me.
So
because
3 times higher than the next
three
highest
times
priority.
higher. Yeah. And so, which we got a lot of surprising things out of this poll that I wouldn't expect. As a person who drives, has a car, and is tired of getting flat tires and driving over our very inferior roads, I think repairing streets and roads is pretty high. So I was actually surprised. Homelessness really rose above that.
So earlier this year, back in March, this doesn't directly contradict, but it's another interesting data point. The Competitive Edge did a poll on the mayor's ballot measure for that campaign, and they asked as a follow-up, what was your they asked people who supported the measure, what was your reason for supporting the measure? And number 1 was visitors will pay the tax. Number 2 was funding for homeless people. And 3 was the general importance of things being funded through the ballot measure. So they didn't actually specify, any of those people didn't specify the convention center. So now you've got the poll, right? People have this poll and competing polls, and people can spar out whether they prefer one methodology or one phrasing of questions over another. How does this change the discussion in your mind?
Well, I hope it actually starts a bigger discussion about moving something forward that represents the city's priorities.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's having the mayor change what he wants to do and reprioritize some of that funding for what the voters say is the highest priority, or if it's moving something bigger forward that is homelessness specific. We've seen a lot of success with homelessness specific ballot measures across the state last year. This poll shows that we can clearly do something very similar and get significant amount of resources to build that housing system that we know we need in order to make our existing system work better and to get more people out of homelessness.
Yeah. Are you concerned? There was a UT story on this poll this morning. Tony Manalotta's spokesperson for the campaign said that essentially the polling will take a hit once the hotel industry started spending money in opposition of the campaign. Are you concerned at the possibility that as long as this is funded with a hotel tax increase, that the hotel industry needs to be on board?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. There's 2 things. So this is just one poll. This is just the first poll.
Mm-hmm.
The TOT is just one tax.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's anything that's off the table about how we move homelessness funding forward here in the city. Obviously, there's a huge support for using the TOT to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we need to craft something that includes all the people who are interested in this and all the people who are going to benefit from reducing homelessness. And the hoteliers, the tourism authority, all of those folks, they're going to benefit a lot from reducing homelessness. We know that.
By their own, they've said it.
Yeah.
They've said it
Mm-hmm.
publicly, right? So.
And even by putting homelessness, a little bit of homelessness funding into this measure, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty clear. I think we can craft something and bring all the people or the majority of people to the table
Mm-hmm.
around an initiative that doesn't just benefit tourism and the hoteliers and different types of businesses that a convention center does, but really benefits and touches a much wider group of stakeholders by having a homelessness-specific measure that includes a lot of affordable housing, permanent supportive housing, which permanent supportive housing for people who are homeless, this is really important, is affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
You can't separate those 2 things. It's just affordable housing with supportive services. So I know that there's going to be some people who want to have a little play on words that affordable housing may be attractive, or maybe unattractive to some voters, but housing for homeless people will be more attractive. It's the same things, folks. Affordable housing for homeless people is called permanent supportive housing and other things,
Mm-hmm.
but it's all the same and it benefits all of our community because as we build up a stock of housing that's affordable for many different people, including people experiencing homelessness, it's going to enrich our community. And so, and certainly the people who are going to participate in the jobs that this will bring in. So building permanent supportive housing or affordable housing is a job creator.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good thing. And it puts people more where they work. It's good for everybody. It's good for our climate action plan, you name it. If we increase density, if we do permanent supportive housing or affordable housing, we're all going to benefit. I don't see how the tourism authority or other people involved in that line of work are not going to benefit from this also. And so we certainly want to bring a wide variety of stakeholders to the table and move something forward, which in my mind is the only way to do something, something big and worthwhile like this.
Are there other revenue options that you've studied or you support aside from the TOT? You know, other communities have done bonds, or that's not the only option to get money for homelessness.
No, LA did both. The city of LA did a property tax measure. The county of LA did a sales tax measure. There's 3 or 4 others, and I don't want to quote what they did because I don't know it well enough, but there's been a variety of tax measures moved forward across the state, most of them successfully. Once again, I didn't test a lot of different tax measures for this because even though it's a 20-minute poll, it's pretty comprehensive. I wanted to kind of get a good baseline of where we're at and what people are going to support, and then we'll see what is the next step from here. What information people need or what information I feel is needed to move forward. But this really is about building a community effort, a community coalition. So I would encourage anybody who's interested, it doesn't matter whether you support the mayor's TOT increase or not. Let's sit down, let's think this through, and let's do something that really benefits our community in a big way.
And that is, just for clarity, your eyes are mostly on November 2018.
Yeah, absolutely. I this is just personally doesn't really have anything to do with the polling or anything. I think that it is better to have a big turnout and where most people do vote, so there's a buy-in. And our polling shows that 2018 does way better than a special election anyway.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit confusing to me why there's a big push for a special election when it clearly shows it doesn't.
Both measures do better with the higher turnout.
Yeah, and I just feel that that's just the way to go. So I don't want to rush anything on people. I want to support something. And by the way, this isn't about me. This isn't about me moving something forward. I'm looking to support a broader community effort. So whatever that is, I want it to be people who are focused on a general election that has a good turnout.
You know, it's really funny that you say that because timing has been this whole, flashpoint over the measure. And it's my understanding that the mayor has argued that we need this measure to happen as soon as possible or in 2017 precisely because homelessness is such an urgent problem. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of interesting that, here you are advocating for solely a homelessness measure and you're saying 2018 is the way to go.
Yeah, well, so I would love to have done something during the last election. There just really didn't seem like there was enough will to do something big. And I'll also say there's hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to be flowing into our community for homelessness over the next 5 or so years.
State and federal.
State, federal, the state's No Place Like Home, which I think is estimated at 130 to 150 million for capital projects for people with a serious mental illness who are also homeless. I think one of the bigger things that's coming online is whole person wellness. I think it's known locally as whole person care, which is Medicaid funding for to help people experiencing homelessness get into housing as part of their health care. Mm-hmm. So there's other initiatives. There's other things. I mean, we actually have a pretty long list of things that are going on in San Diego, either currently or moving or going to be coming into the community here in the next few years. So it's not, and we spend $100+ million a year now on just homelessness funding. I'm not talking about the capital build outs or anything. I'm talking about the VA funding, which is about $35 million for homeless veterans, and then emergency shelters, transitional housing, operating permanent supportive housing. I'm not talking about criminal justice or healthcare funding, but pretty much just the homeless services funding is already about $100+ million. So even though another $10 million is nice, it's not a silver bullet. So we're not giving up a silver bullet here. What we're doing is really looking at long-term, what kind of system do we want to build? Do we want one that's going to not only resolve homelessness quickly, but also going to leave us with a system in place of the proper amount of housing and services that will help us as people become homeless in the future?
Mike McConnell, homeless advocate, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, y'all. Really appreciate it.
And now we are joined in the Voice of San Diego podcast studio with another guest, Andrea Guerrero, the executive director of Alliance San Diego. Andrea, thank you for coming in.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, no problem. So, okay, Alliance San Diego had a big year. You guys put together two ballot measures that were successful. And just a few months later, they are more relevant than ever. And interestingly, I think it's the measure that maybe got less discussion last year that kind of just was always like an afterthought. It was like when point the finger at myself. When I wrote about it, I wrote mostly about Measure K and I would refer to it as K and L, but then I would always discuss K. Yeah. And here we are. Measure L is now a major topic in San Diego politics. So, tell us, first of all, why don't I let you do it? You probably do a better job. What does Measure L do, and why does it matter right now?
Measure L, the new, hot, sexy topic
Yes.
that nobody anticipated,
Yeah.
was a measure that 2/3 of the voters passed this last election in order to schedule our local ballot measures, our big decisions, on the November general elections. And so that means that the next election where local measures would fall naturally is November 2018.
Yeah. And so that has relevance today because there is a special election proposal, 2 ballot measures proposed to go on one special election in November of this year. And although, again, pointing the finger at myself, when that was first proposed, I didn't immediately think, oh, wait a second, we just had Measure L. They're not allowed to do this. But very quickly, the Democrats on the city council started voicing their reasoning for not supporting a special election, and it was Measure L. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's right. So Measure L did preserve the special election for emergency circumstances, for compelling circumstances. The rationale was for good government reasons, we need to make sure that there is an opportunity for city council to bring in something to the voters when it can't wait. And so the question that is being presented to council right now is this one of those circumstances? Is this a situation where people can't wait? We need to decide these right now. We can't wait until November 2018. And council has fallen on the side of no, this is not one of those instances. This is the first test of Measure L. We've just heard from the voters loudly and clearly that they want to decide on the big issues when the most people participate, and those are in the November general elections. And so let's do that. Let's put these to the voters then.
And so walk me through, in your mind, how what would be the rubric, or what would be the litmus test for when a special election rises to the level of something that can't wait, to use your exact words?
I think we look to precedent. We look at the fact that city council has never called a special election for a local measure. So they
Is that true?
That is true.
I did not know that.
So they have let all kinds of situations pass and decided that they weren't compelling enough. So that gives us an idea of what's not compelling enough, right? And that sort of sets a minimum threshold in a way. We do know that they have called special elections for city council seats and mayoral seats that have been vacated. So I think the threshold is a combination of those two. It is as compelling as having to fill a vacant seat, and it is more compelling than the circumstances that we've already seen where city council has not decided to call a special. And so the example I like to use is minimum wage. In 2014, city council passed an ordinance increasing the minimum wage. Our current mayor, vetoed that. City council overrode it, and then opponents of the increase referendized it, which meant that it was going to go on a ballot, not unlike what Soccer City has done here. They've qualified a measure. It will go on a ballot.
So it's minor difference. Theirs is an initiative. This is a referendum, but it's
very
similar.
Signature-based qualification.
Yeah.
And so in 2014, City Council had to decide, okay, are we going to call a special election for this, or are we going to wait till the next general election, which is in 2018, 2 years later? And they decided to wait. And in that instance, what they were deciding was whether to lift 200,000 families out of poverty or not. That's pretty compelling. I would have been okay if they had called a special election in that circumstances, because those were real families, real people, facing some very serious concerns, and that wasn't compelling enough. And so now here we are on the heels of Measure L, and we're thinking about whether the special interests that have brought forward development plans for one for the stadium, one for the convention center are compelling enough, and I don't think it meets the litmus test, and nor does council.
So the two arguments that I've heard that I think specifically speak to the timing issue, maybe you guys know of others, is I think the mayor has brought up the fact that there's this homelessness funding in the convention center measure, and he said, just like with the minimum wage, there are people who are suffering that this could help, and that's an argument for this more timely election. And then there's the issue with the Soccer City proposal of will this deal fall through by 2018? So what's your response to those two specific timing arguments?
Yeah, so let's take those one at a time. So on the convention center, that also addresses homelessness to some extent. The homelessness solutions that are coming into that measure are recent. In fact, they've only been brought in the last, last month or so. And so my response would be, Mayor, if these were compelling enough circumstances, you would have centered this measure around homelessness, but you haven't. Homelessness has become just an add-on in order to justify a measure to increase the occupancy tax. City council recognized that homelessness is a crisis, and in fact, they moved the money that we would have spent for a special election into homelessness solutions. And so city council has addressed the beginning of solutions, and I think that's fantastic, and I think we need to do a whole lot more. But make no mistake about it, the convention center measure is not, in principle, not centrally about homelessness. That's being addressed by City Council by moving money directly into homelessness solutions. On the issue of Soccer City.
But before we get to Soccer City, since there is another timing component being argued on Convention Center, we'll deal with it in order. The other thing they say is that the construction costs are inflating over time considerably. Since the last time the Convention Center was approved, it's become substantially more expensive than it was at the time, and another year will continue that progress. So essentially, we'll be getting less and less out of the tax increase every day or every month or year that we wait. So pass it now so that we can avoid an additional year of inflation. What about that?
Well, I'll address that briefly, but I don't think that's the crux of the issue. I mean, the mayor let the opportunity to acquire the land for an expansion, he let that opportunity go by. And now he's trying to get voters to pass a measure when we don't have the land for the expansion, right? So that seems a little crazy. But it's not the crux of the issue. The issue is about our democracy. It's about how we make decisions and not about what those decisions should be. So I could be convinced that an increase to the occupancy tax is a good idea in order to fund the variety of things that the mayor wants to fund, namely the expansion of the convention center. But what I'm deeply concerned about, and what 2/3 of the voters in the city are concerned about, is about how we make these decisions. And we should be making these big decisions. This land is an opportunity for us to set the vision for the future. And we should be making that scale of a decision when the most people are participating, not when a small fraction of the voters are participating. This is an issue that can be brought to the voters in November 2018. In fact, a similar issue was just brought to the voters in 2016. Voters overwhelmingly rejected an increase to the occupancy tax that would have included an expansion to the convention center, right? So I understand the mayor's concern that he feels a sense of urgency, but that same urgency existed in 2016 when the voters said, you know what, this is not the right plan for us, and they voted it down.
And so, okay, now Soccer City.
Soccer City. Okay.
Let's talk about
MLS's expansion timeline.
Okay. So first of all, this is at least the second time in recent history that a sport franchise is issuing an ultimatum to voters and saying
to us. If you count not the voters of San Diego, it's the umpteenth time that they've issued an ultimatum.
All right.
This is the second time in San Diego.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, personally, I don't like to be bullied around by a sports franchise that
especially
says
by
now or
a
never.
team we don't even have yet.
Yeah, right. So we don't have a convention center. I mean, we don't have the land for a convention center, and we don't have a team for a soccer stadium. So, and yet we're being rushed to vote on these two things. Again, on the Soccer City initiative, I would say it's a matter of what. It's a matter of how we're making decisions, not a matter of what. And we don't want to rig the game, using their analogies of sports, because, man, do they love bringing out the soccer balls. It's like, I don't care how many times you say soccer, this measure,
I fall victim to it also.
this measure has problems. But using their analogies for a second, putting this measure to a special election is rigging the game.
I thought you were going to say it would be an own goal.
Oh, yeah, see.
That's a high level.
That's when you score on yourself.
Oh, all right.
Oh, dear
Yeah.
God, did you just explain an own goal to two women?
I got you. I got
She
you.
didn't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, think
I know
about
you knew. You just said it was a high level thing. You got it.
So think about it this way. The special elections that we have had have only been for candidates. They've not been for measures. And in those special elections, we've only seen a fraction of the voters vote. We've never seen more than 50% turnout at a special. Now, if we're looking at just to the north of us in Los Angeles, they just had their 4th special election. And
It's like an every Tuesday.
yeah, they love their special elections, and those aren't meaningful decisions. They're getting single-digit turnouts every single time. Now, do we want to be like Los Angeles? There are lots of reasons why we don't want to be like Los Angeles.
A lot of
That's
reasons
a
we might want
compelling
to.
argument that I feel like San Diego.
But single-digit turnouts is not a meaningful decision, and it's not honoring the will of the voters. It's not strengthening our democracy. I mean, if we're serious about an inclusive democracy, then we have to be inclusive. We have to make decisions when the most people participate.
Okay, so the most direct response I could think of when I hear your thought process is that it does seem like at some point the litmus test comes down to priorities and where you land on the policies themselves. So, for instance, you said minimum wage increase, which you characterize as lifting 200,000 some families out of poverty, seems to you to be something that would rise to the level. Now, certainly there are people who don't even think it's a good policy decision at all, let alone something that is urgently needed. That's just something that on which reasonable people have decided to disagree. I think you could, let's stipulate for a second that you believe that MLS's timeline is real and that the Soccer City deal is a good one for the city. If you were to combine those two things, you could make a good faith argument, I think, that we have the potential of losing a good deal and a good opportunity to generate revenue out of an underused asset that will be gone if we don't act quickly, right? So now people could debate whether those two things are true, whether the MLS timeline is real and whether the deal is good. But if you are a person who has come to those two conclusions, then you're going to feel differently about how reasonable the sense of urgency is. And so at that point, it becomes really difficult to suss out when a special election is meets the standards set by Measure L.
So in light of Measure L, we're not weighing dollars gained versus dollars lost.
Mm-hmm.
We're weighing what is a developer-initiated ballot measure and the special interests involved in getting that passed against the strength of our democracy. And regardless of the merits of the measure, we have to be willing to sacrifice participation in our democracy in order to move something like that forward. In my mind, only in the most exigent circumstances should we be even considering putting something to a special election when we know that only a small fraction of voters are going to participate, and that's going to undermine our decision-making processes in the city, especially when you talk about Soccer City on a piece of land that is a jewel, one of our greatest jewels in the city of San Diego. It shouldn't even be about whether an up and down vote on a particular developer's plan. It should be a full conversation with the electorate about what is the best use of this jewel that we have.
Okay, that does it for me. Sarah, do you got anything else? Anything to do? Actually, I take that back. I want to ask you a little bit about your organization. So,
Sure.
Set measure L, set measure K aside. What do you guys do? Who are you?
Who are we?
Yeah.
We are social justice warriors. We have capes. They're beautiful. They're multicolored, and we fly through the air, and we try to bring justice and democracy to the city of San Diego. No. What do we do? Well, we do that, but we are a community-based organization, and we are building people power, helping people more fully engage in the civic process, in our democracy, so that we can create the kinds of policies that allow people to achieve their full potential. And that runs the gamut of issues, but at the core, what we're trying to do is make sure that people are involved in the decision-making. We believe that democracy functions best when the most people participate.
So what would be another ballot measure or another policy proposal that you would put forward in 2 years, 4 years, 6 years? What, having dealt with the issues with making decisions during low turnout elections, what would be something else that you might decide to spend your resources on?
Well, I think we could do the same thing at the county level. In fact, there's efforts underway to do that as well. Look to other cities to do similar things. I think there's more work to do here. We also work at the state and the national level. So we would invite the participation of the community to think about what are the things that can strengthen our democracy and that could allow more of us, all of us, to achieve our full potential, right? Yeah. But I do think it's fun that we're all getting a civics lesson San Diego style right now. Who knew that the strong mayor system allowed for a veto of a budget? And we're all having
Apparently
to figure,
no one.
Right. We're having to figure out what a strong mayor system means, what the mayor can vote on or veto, what he can't. And I think, at the national level, we're all having a civics lesson. And I think it's fun to see that at the city level, we're doing that too. And man, democracy is on fire. Did you see how many people showed up at the last city council meeting?
Yeah, did you organize that showing of support?
We organized much of it, but there were people who are just fired up. Democracy is becoming like the top-rated show in America.
Or arguably not.
Or it's cratering right in front of us, and we are all basking in its steaming ashes.
Have faith, have faith, have faith. We will emerge like the phoenix.
All right. Andrea, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank
Appreciate
you
it very much.
All right.
Today's show was produced by me, Andrew Keatts, and Scott Lewis. It was recorded by Adam Greenfield in the Great Voice of San Diego podcast studio, where we also produce Good Schools for All and Kinsey Moreland's Culture Cast. Thank you to our partners at Kogo 600.
Like us, love us, maybe not Andy, maybe me, got some feedback? Let us know by rating and reviewing this show on iTunes. We value the feedback from our listeners so we can keep making a show you'll enjoy.